We're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. Something kind of interesting about the third chapter is that Daniel does not appear. This chapter is all about his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and what they did and what their reward was. So far, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have been given upgrades in their life in Babylon through Daniel. But this one is just these three young men. So by his influence, perhaps by their own spiritual growth, they are ready for this challenge, and they have become well known for it. This is one that even the little kids can tell you about. They study about this early on, the idea of being faithful even in the face of great danger. So chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide, and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. That's roughly 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. So this is a huge undertaking just architecturally to make something like that and to set it up out in the plain. The question comes up, of whom is the statue? Is he representing anyone, or is it just a generalized statue? There are two good guesses. The first guess is it's a statue of himself, and I've heard a lot of people say that this was a statue. He wanted people to fall down and worship him. But we actually have some archaeology on Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a very religious man, as maybe is evidenced by all the different groups that he had around him all the time that were soothsayers and prophets and priests and such. He was mainly a worshiper of Marduk. That's the way I say it. It's M-A-R-D-U-K, maybe Marduk, but I'm from Alabama, so Marduk. And Marduk was often depicted in statues, often in gold. So if you've got a 90-foot tall golden statue, there's a good chance this was Marduk. It also makes sense in the idea that Marduk accepted human sacrifice. In the Babylonian culture, human sacrifice goes way, way back. So the idea of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being sacrificed or thrown into the fire would match up pretty well with Marduk. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they all stood before it. So if you can get that picture in your mind, this is a huge gathering of all the muckety-mucks of Babylon. All these guys had important jobs. They were high-ranking officials and their families, and they knew where their bread was buttered, right? If Nebuchadnezzar told them to do something, that's exactly what they were going to do. But again, this list includes Daniel's office, but we never see Daniel in this chapter. We don't know why, don't know where he was or why he isn't mentioned with the rest of it, but he's not there. The herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So obviously the penalty for noncompliance is death. Everybody knows it. And all the people that you're with are part of the infrastructure for the nation. So you know them, they know you. And to do anything differently in this case would not only be dangerous to you physically, but just socially. It makes people are going to go along with this because they don't want to die, obviously. And even if they weren't going to die, they were going to lose face in front of all these other people. He mentions that people of every language. Now, Babylon had been conquering lots and lots of folks. And as a result, they had people in their infrastructure from different nations. If you remember, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were brought over in that first load before Jerusalem gets destroyed, and they have been well trained in Babylonian politics, Babylonian business, how things work in Babylon. So when he says people of every nation, people of every language, pay attention. This applies to everybody, not just Babylonian nationals. If you live here, then this applies to you. Verse 7, therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Okay, so everybody complies. There are other Jewish nationals that were taken captive at the same time Daniel and his friends were. I'm assuming that they're among the everybody's. So there are people that should not be bowing down. Of course, none of them should be worshiping an idol, but there are people that know better in the crowd. And even the people that know better are bowing down, which for the Jewish nation at that time was not that uncommon. Why are they in Babylon? They worshiped idols, right? So God finally got enough of them and sent the Babylonians to invade them. So they're not that far from bowing down to yet another idol if it'll keep them alive. Look at verse 9. At this time, some astrologers came forward to denounce the Jews. So as a group, and probably most particularly, they wanted to denounce Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What happened when Daniel was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream? He saved all these guys, right? So this long list of folks owe their lives. They didn't get chopped up in little pieces to Daniel. But on the negative side for them, what happened? Daniel got the quick promotion. He went from one of them to their boss. So Daniel is in charge of all of these guys. But again, where is he? He may have been taking care of affairs of state and couldn't attend. He may have decided not to attend. We're just never told. But all of these people that come forward to denounce the Jews, they know that they can get a leg up on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are high-ranking officials now, if they can, if they can get them killed, especially, but if nothing else, if they can get King Nebuchadnezzar to realize that the Jews are bad. We don't want to let Jews be in charge of anything. We don't want to let them have any authority. And so they come forward to denounce them. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of other music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace." Just a sidelight. How many of you like to write? Write stories, write poetry, just write in general? Nobody? Linda? Yeah, used to. How repetitious is this chapter? Have you noticed? See above with a little arrow would have worked fairly well, but they list it all out every time. Why do you think? If you're just thinking of linguistics and ways of getting a message across, why say it all every time? It's just to make a point. It just emphasizes it over and over and over. So you don't just hear it once and then it kind of falls to the back of your mind. Every section that has its list gets that list at least twice. So it's reinforced. Everybody is expected to comply, and these guys know it, and they kind of read the law back to Nebuchadnezzar. This happens again, by the way, later on with Daniel under King Cyrus, I guess it is, when he gets thrown in the lion's den. People that don't like Daniel come and kind of read the law back to the king. This is what you said, and this is what you have to do because now you said it. And so these guys are going to get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego any way they can. But, verse 12, there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So what's the burr in their saddle? Not just that they're Jews, not just that they're not bowing down. They have power. We don't want these guys to have power. We don't want them to have any authority in our affairs, and we need to get rid of them. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty, they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. So again, all these guys owe their lives to Daniel, but they've got an opening now to try to do something about their situation. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are kind of in the crosshairs. Verse 13, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all the other kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? He has a clue as to why they refuse to bow down. They believe in Yahweh, and they're not going to bow down to some other god. Marduk is not their god. They're not going to act like Marduk is their god. They're not going to pay homage to him. And if it's a statue of the king, same thing. We're not going to worship you. We're not going to worship an image of you. And they've made up their mind, but he knows why. There's no mystery here as far as communication is concerned. Nebuchadnezzar knows why they won't bow down. They don't honor him and his God, and he does not honor them and their God. What happened? You remember in chapter 2, Daniel tells him the secrets of his heart, gives him the dream and the interpretation of his dream, and he says, surely your God is the God above all gods. But, that was last week. Now he's setting up an image of Marduk and telling people to worship it. The next quote, the next section is the meat of the matter. It's fantastic. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. I like these guys. I mean, it's straight to the point. Look, here's what you've said. We understand the law. Here's what's going to happen to us. We understand that might just happen. And we're still going to do what we're going to do because we follow Yahweh. We don't follow Marduk. We're not going to bow down to your idol, so do whatever you're going to do. Either God will save us or he won't, but either way, we are not going to bow down. The fact that they refuse to mount a defense, we don't need to answer you in this matter. And that's just uber manly to me. It's just this idea that, look, we've talked about it, we know what we're doing, and nothing that you say is going to change what we're going to do. So Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. His attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing fire. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So they're thrown in. Whether this is a sacrificial thing, we'll show you Marduk is the strongest, we'll just sacrifice you to him, or whether it's just punitive. If you remember, he was going to chop everybody up in little pieces if they couldn't tell him his dream and the interpretation. So he's not a nice guy. You don't want to get on Nebuchadnezzar's bad side. But he just throws them alive into the fire. And the strongest soldiers that he could muster are in charge of throwing them in, and they get killed just by getting close enough to throw the young men in. So there's a terrible calamity for those guys that are just following orders, but they throw the men in and they fall into the fire. So this is the part where the little kids could tell us the rest of the story, right? What happens to them? Nothing. Nothing. They're just walking around in the fire. King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and said to his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" And they replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Some of the older translations have a son of the God or the son of God. What does everybody have? You've got what? A son of the gods. What does that mean? By the time you get to Jesus' day, a son of something meant they were that. Right? A son of a horse is a horse, and the son of a cow is a cow. So that's what you are. That's your the way that you identify. So he is a son of the gods, which means he's godlike. There's something about him that looks godlike. So the big question is, who's the 4th guy in the fire? And folks have been talking about it for years and years and years and years. Does anybody have a think so? Jesus. That's one of the things that people put forward. It's called a theophany. And they'll go back into the Old Testament, and times that God or a God in a form would show up. And it's an interesting thought. It's not one that you can easily prove one way or another, but there are a lot of people that believe that this was God in some form that shows up. And the reason is that it says he looked like a son of the gods or a son of a god. So when we think son of God, we think Jesus. Theophany, by the way, means theos is the Greek word for God. So a God appearance, a God showing up event. What else? Who else is called sons of God? Angels, right? So maybe we've got an angel that shows up in the fire with them to take care of them. If you go down to verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to rescue his servants." So eventually, he comes up with angel, or at least the translators come up with angel. The idea in their vernacular of an angel was one who was a messenger. So God has sent his messenger to take care of them. Again, we don't know what kind of messenger he was. When they come out of the fire, guy number 4 does not come with them. Any other suggestions? Maybe Daniel? Anybody, you ever heard somebody say, well, maybe Daniel showed up and put himself in there, or God put him in so he could pump him up and say, it's okay, don't worry about it? The answer is, we don't know who the 4th guy was. Best guess is an angel of God that came to minister to them. Think about when Jesus was in the desert for 40 days. Satan comes and tempts him 3 times. At the end of that passage in Mark, it says, and angels came and ministered to him. So maybe that was the kind of thing that was going on. So go back to 26. Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Who are they servants of? The Most High God. Is Nebuchadnezzar wishy-washy? Why, yes, he is. He will be in for a little while and out for a little while. Oh, Daniel, your God is the God above all gods. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you are servants of the Most High God. But he still doesn't give himself over to God and God's law. He recognizes him occasionally. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the royal advisors, all crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Who noticed it? The guys who went to Nebuchadnezzar and said, we don't want these Jews in charge of our stuff, right? You've got Jews among us that are not bowing down, and you need to throw them in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar throws them in the fire. The fire doesn't hurt them. They come back out. Does that help or hurt the guys that originally, they didn't get anywhere with this line of attack? Go back to the end of 28. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. So again, he's all happy, happy, joy, joy. He's, on the Yahweh bandwagon for a little while, and then he'll fade back out. But notice verse 30, the end of the thing. Chapter 1, think back. We're not going to eat your food. We're going to eat vegetables and water. Time comes for the end, and they're better than everybody else. Right? Chapter 2, all of the wise men and the satraps, etc., 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 cannot come up with the dream or the interpretation of the dream. Daniel gets it, so Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are elevated once again. Get to chapter 3, Daniel's not there, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come through. Verse 30 says the king promoted them in the province of Babylon. So they get a promotion, again, ahead of all of these other guys that were trying to get them killed. So 3 times in 3 chapters, right, we follow our own law concerning food. We let God be the one to interpret the dream. And then we refuse to buy into your culture or your God or just be one of everybody else. We remain Jewish. We remain law keepers. We remain followers of Yahweh. Thoughts? Comments? Nope. We've known the story a long time, haven't we? It's good to be reminded. How can we apply it? There's all kinds of opportunities for us these days to be flexible in our surroundings, to just kind of go along to get along. And it's going to take more of our effort to strongly take a stance and just say, no, that's wrong. No, God doesn't allow that. No, we're not in favor of that. And we're not going to follow along with your lead just so you'll be nice to us or so you'll think we're okay. We're going to be solid in our understanding of what Scripture says. We're going to follow that instead of what culture says. And some of us will have more opportunities to be in the crosshairs, perhaps than others. But when it's our turn to have somebody look at us crossways because we believe Scripture and we stand firm for Scripture, I hope we're like these 3 guys, that we just stand up and say, well, if you like me, okay. If you don't like me, okay. If you want to hurt me, God may save me. But if he doesn't, I'm still not going to do what you want me to do because I follow Yahweh. I follow Christ. And whether we see it in this world or the next, the Lord will take care of us and will reward us. Anything else? Okay. Tell you guys bye.